The extraordinary case of the umbrella crime, the investigation. Once held in custody, Salvador made his official statement regarding the events that led to Enrique's death. He had spent the evening fishing at the nearby Balio River. As dusk set in, Salvador packed his fishing gear and his umbrella before heading back to the village, but before going home he decided to visit the local tavern for a drink and maybe to chat with some locals. Unfortunately, that evening Enrique was at the tavern, and he had no intention of leaving Salvador alone. As always, Enrique had drunk a bit too much, which everyone knew fueled his violent tendencies. He started to verbally abuse Salvador, who, by his and witnesses' accounts, wanted no part of Enrique's drama. He centered all his attention on Salvador, making degrading remarks about his health and his sickly appearance until the tavern's owner finally had enough and told Enrique that he could choose to either shut up or leave. Enrique chose the latter. Salvador stayed at the tavern for a while afterward, and he left to walk back home at about 9:15 p.m. He carried his fishing gear and a closed umbrella. It wasn't raining at the time, down this road when, less than a couple of minutes from his parents' home, Enrique ambushed him and stood in his way. Apparently, the old bully had been waiting for him there to finish his torment of Salvador. The young man, insisting on not wanting any trouble, tried to walk his way around Enrique, but he wouldn't let him through. From this point on everything happened very fast. The much physically stronger Enrique began swinging punches at Salvador, who could only raise his arms in front of him in an attempt to protect himself. Then, Enrique grabbed the lapels of Salvador's shirt and dragged him out of the road and into a small adjacent crop. Enrique continued beating Salvador up who, to his horror, had intuited that Enrique had even more nefarious intentions than just a beating. The bully had started directing powerful blows at Salvador's torso. He was aiming at the morphine pump. Salvador knew this confrontation had just turned into a life-or-death situation. If Enrique's fists crushed the pump, then the device would subsequently release a massive, uncontrolled dose of morphine into his bloodstream. If that happened, the morphine would make him pass out and stop breathing. Fearing for his life, Salvador reacted now more aggressively and began swinging back at Enrique. He punched the bully with his left fist, but he also hit him with the closed umbrella he carried in his right hand. According to Salvador, during this chaotic fight, he could barely notice where he was hitting Enrique or how hard. But then, right after sensing he had just hit him in the face with the umbrella for the last time, Enrique suddenly stepped back, with a heavy nosebleed, and looked confused, before going limp and dropping unconscious. Finally, noticing that Enrique was seriously injured, Salvador ran back to the tavern for help. The investigators took Salvador to the crime scene in order to reenact the confrontation. Meanwhile, the coroner, at the city of Ferrol, examined the injuries on Enrique's body to determine the cause of death and to determine the veracity of Salvador's statement as well. What he found shocked investigators. Enrique had died from a devastating brain injury. The base of his brain had been stabbed, literally, through his nose. Something had pierced through the bony wall at the back of his nasal cavity. It had to be quite sharp. This clue was however puzzling. At no point, Salvador mentioned any weapon, and he couldn't possibly have caused such injury by punching Enrique in the nose, even if he had been healthy. But soon investigators remembered particular item Salvador carried with him that night: the umbrella. It was soon collected by authorities. There was nothing special about the umbrella, except for the sharp aluminum tip-head on the top. It was analyzed by the forensic team from Ferrol. As unbelievable as the idea could have looked, they were right. That tip contained evidence that matched the mechanism behind Enrique's fatal brain injury. It was one of these scenarios that look straight out of a mediocre action flick or from the Final Destination franchise, but alas, that's what all available evidence showed. Desperate for escaping with his life, Salvador had been throwing wild haymakers with his left hand and swinging the umbrella with his right one. Surprisingly, his last blow with the umbrella resulted in that aluminum tip being driven into one of Enrique's nostrils, hard. He lost consciousness shortly after, as the tip had pierced his brain and embedded small bone fragments in it.